Hey, welcome back to Ennoble. This is part 2 of the series, 5 Reasons Your Church Isn't Singing and How to Fix It this weekend. If you missed part 1, be sure to check that out because the first reason your church isn't singing, which is that your church hasn't been taught why or how to worship through singing, is really the theological and philosophical foundation for the whole rest of this series. So be sure to go back and watch part 1 if you haven't already. And once we've established that foundation, we can get right into reason number 2. The second reason your church isn't singing is because they aren't being led. Your church may not be singing because they aren't being led to sing. Congregational worship is supposed to be congregational. It's supposed to be collective. But the hard truth is that many of our churches have designed corporate worship gatherings or experiences that inevitably create spectators instead of participants. And being a worship leader means leading others to worship with you and always reminding your church that we're gathered to worship together, not individually. We're all singing together, not just a limited few, and certainly not just those on a platform. So how do you lead your church to sing? I think you can do this in a few different ways. First, before you ever step foot on a stage, be sure that you are intentionally designing your church gatherings in a way that encourages participation. Always keep the congregational nature of your services at the front of your mind. Make this a priority. One of the most condemning criticisms of the modern church, and I think rightly so, is that modern church culture often prioritizes or elevates performance over participation. I think a lot of times there's this underlying subconscious belief that if we can do certain things well enough, then we can convince people to want to be a part of what we're doing. If the music is good enough, if the service is polished enough, if our church looks established enough, if we communicate well enough, then people will be compelled to join in. Those things will lead to engagement and transformation. But no matter how good the intention is, that inevitably leads to an environment where people become consumers who expect to receive something and be entertained rather than worshipers who are committed to give of themselves and participate in what's supposed to be corporate worship. People end up coming to church asking, what am I going to see this week and what am I going to get out of this, instead of what can I contribute to this? I think as worship leaders, this calls for some tough self-evaluation. We have to ask ourselves, what are our highest priorities, and does our church gathering actually demonstrate that? You should take a look at the structure and the flow and the elements of your service. Think about the songs you sing. Think about the things that are routinely said and emphasized from the stage. Think about the look and the layout of your stage, how you physically place people on the platform and what the focus is. Think about your use of production and technology, even the volume of your service. None of these things are inherently bad. By all means, be creative. Use the tools you have at your disposal. The church has been doing that for centuries, way before modern technology. But take time to ask yourself why you do the things you do, why your service is crafted the way it is, and what might need to change in order to encourage your church to participate more, even if some of those changes might seem like a step backwards in the church today. I think there are lots of things we do in our churches today that actually work against the idea of emphasizing congregational participation. And maybe it's time for us to reevaluate some of those things in our ministries. In part 1 of the series, we talked about how God is the one who initiates our responsive worship. So there's nothing we can do, no action we can perform that inspires worship. There's no song, there's no lighting, there's no emotion, there's no pastor or person who can inspire true worship. And yet sometimes we do things in our churches that would seem to say that we think we can. So I want to give you a few very practical questions that I would encourage you to ask yourself to sort of gauge where you are in this and what steps you might want to take to make some changes. And though I am admittedly biased and have my own thoughts about where we should all land on these, it really is up to you and your other church leaders to determine the answers to these questions and your convictions for your church. So here are some examples of things you should ask yourself as a worship leader when you're thinking about how you're leading people to engage. First, what is the true focus of your corporate worship gathering? I think most of us would say right away, of course, it's Jesus. But really think about this and what the things you emphasize show that you value most. I think if we answer this honestly, Some of us may find that we've been elevating the experience of people over the worship of Christ. Ask yourself, do the songs we sing encourage and enable people to sing? And we'll talk more about this specifically later in this series. Think about your song arrangements, your instrumentation, even your choir if you have one. Are there ways these could better emphasize congregational singing as a priority when we gather? Ask yourself, does the way we use production and technology, audio, visuals, lighting, do these things truly encourage people to engage in worship together, or are there ways it might actually be hindering what we're trying to accomplish? A couple very specific questions I like to challenge worship ministries with are, do we dim the house lights during singing? And if so, how much? How do we use lighting effects or movement or haze? And do those things encourage the collective worship of our people, or do they encourage individual worship? And then a little bit more big picture, when you talk about the future and the goals you have for your ministry, when you envision what your church service or your physical worship space will one day look like, what are the things you see? What are the upgrades you're pursuing? What are the things you feel like you need to have or to do in order to lead people well, and why? And then from that, which of those things are actually necessary and helpful in leading your church to sing biblically? Now, before you turn off this video, again, I'm not saying not to be creative. I'm not saying that these things are prohibited in Scripture. And of course, God's Word is the final authority in any matter of our life, including our worship philosophy. But just because something isn't prohibited in Scripture, and even though it might be normal and encouraged by modern church culture, doesn't make it beneficial. And that's the question I think we need to be asking when we make these decisions. Is this beneficial for congregational singing? You have to be truly honest with yourself when you answer that, and then be willing to act on that answer. The hardest part of all this is when the answer is no, maybe this is not beneficial. We have to be willing to stop doing those things, no matter who else you see doing it or how hard you've worked for it in the past. If you're concerned that your church isn't singing, you have to be willing to eliminate any part of your service that takes away from the congregational nature of your church gathering. I think this is where the idea that successful church means bigger and better and more polished and trying to look like or keep up with so-and-so's popular church has really steered us down a dangerous path. We've gotten to this point where we say, like, your church still does that, or your church still doesn't have this. We have this very specific idea of what successful churches look like. And I think it's time for us to reevaluate and course correct a little bit. And if you can do that honestly, you might find you've been chasing solutions to the problem that aren't actually solutions at all. And I'll say it again, this doesn't mean you can't be creative. I don't think God desires that. God is creative. He defines creativity, and He wires creativity within us as His creation made in His image. So absolutely use the creativity He's given you. But every decision you make for your church gathering should reinforce congregational singing, not move you further away from it. Every church, every community, every people group is different. But if we agree, the Bible tells us that worship as the church is meant to honor God and to be service to and fellowship with each other, that has to influence the decisions that we make and what our gatherings look like and prioritize. And ultimately, those decisions will determine the type of disciples that our churches make. Something I say often to teams of creatives I lead is spiritual over creative, meaning we prioritize the spiritual things over the creative ones. We prioritize spiritual growth over creative growth. And this doesn't mean that those two things are always opposed to each other. They can and often do go hand in hand. I firmly believe you can be excellent in artistry and still prioritize spiritual edification. But it does mean that when we have to make decisions based on spiritual convictions or artistic pursuits, and you will have to make those decisions, we will always choose the spiritual first. And I'll admit this can be really difficult for those of us who are wired as creatives and artists who want to push the limits of our creativity, even with good intentions for the betterment of the church. But if we want to see true transformational worship and discipleship, then our worship gatherings have to prioritize the spiritual over the creative. The concept I mentioned of very dimly lit worship rooms is the perfect example. As an artist or a creative or a lighting tech, the aesthetic of lower room lights and the emphasis and emotion that low house lighting can help evoke is appealing and even beneficial. But when it contradicts or is inconsistent with the biblical principle of encouraging congregational singing and communal fellowship and edifying those in the body around you, then it's no longer worth the creative benefit at the expense of the spiritual benefit. When the room's too dark, it may be a great personal worship experience, but I'm encouraged to focus more on that personal worship experience than I am to worship with those around me. It's a simple thing that's done in lots of churches with good intentions to create a more worshipful environment or to remove distractions. But the question is, does it lead your people to sing with each other? That doesn't mean you have to leave your house lights on full blast. Certainly dim your fluorescent lights if that's helpful a little bit. But the point is, how many of us never even really think about how to balance the feel of the room with the practical and biblical principle of being able to see and sing to each other in corporate worship and how that affects your church as a whole? A lot of us dim our house lights during singing because it's standard almost anywhere you go. It's just what we do. But when we force ourselves to weigh those two options, those two outcomes, we might find that we need to take a different approach. So as a worship leader, ask yourself these types of questions and consider how the creative decisions you make will affect the biblical worship culture that you ultimately want to see established in your church. For some of you watching this, making this type of change in your church is going to be a lot harder and a lot more costly than for others. For some of you, your main income comes from being a part of one of these teams. And for a lot of churches, these types of changes would be a fairly drastic shift from what you do every week now. I've been there. I've served at larger churches that did the typical megachurch experience. And I've served at smaller churches that felt that type of service was the goal to work towards. And all the while, I'm wrestling with whether or not a lot of the things we're pursuing will actually make a difference in making disciples and in seeing biblical transformation. And chances are, if you're still watching this video, you might be wrestling with some of the same questions. I think these are conversations worth having. And no matter what your current situation is, you can start with that honest evaluation. Start making small changes and slowly start shifting your focus and adjusting your priorities with your other church leaders until your worship gathering aligns with those convictions and those biblical principles. Do whatever you can in your ministry to lead your church's gatherings in a direction that keeps congregational participation in mind. The second way you can lead your congregation to sing is to lead them verbally. I think one of the biggest struggles I see for even experienced worship leaders is to shepherd people through what they say and not just be singers and song leaders. For a long time, the church as a whole has prioritized musical skill over calling and leadership ability. And now our churches have generations of incredible singers who don't add much value to congregational worship outside of singing the lyrics of songs, whether they just sing and say nothing else at all, or they talk a lot but say things that mean very little. As worship leaders, our job is to shepherd people verbally as we lead them through singing. And this doesn't have to be difficult. If singing is supposed to be a response of worship to God's revealed truth, then as a worship leader, the best thing you can do to verbally lead your church to sing is to speak to them the truths of Scripture and then verbally encourage them to respond. So the goal of leading verbally should primarily be communicating Scripture. So let's talk about some practical ways to do that. The first way is to be intentional with how you start your church gatherings. Don't overlook how you can lead right at the opening of your service. I like to start almost every service, every single week, by reminding people of a biblical reason we worship corporately. A lot of people would call this the call to worship. In part one of this series, we talked about the fact that some people in our congregations don't ever intend to sing when they come to church, but even the more mature believers that do want to sing don't always walk in ready to sing. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that very few people feel ready to sing when they walk through your church doors first thing on Sunday morning. But as a worship leader, you can help them get ready with a simple biblical call to worship that helps them encounter the truth of Scripture and prepare to respond to it. You can do a lot in a call to worship, but the easiest way to do this is before you play your first song, Just read a verse or a passage of scripture that directly relates to the song you're about to sing, and then encourage your church to think on and respond to that truth as you begin singing together. That's really it. Give people scripture to respond to with singing. Think about these two different scenarios. Scenario one, you've had a tough week, your family woke up late, you got into an argument with your spouse on the way to church, you walk into the worship center and the upbeat countdown ends, and the worship leader just hops up to the mic and says, "Let's stand and worship." And the worship team goes right into Glorious Day. Or scenario two, you've had a tough week, your family woke up late, you got into an argument with your spouse on the way to church, you walk into the worship center and the countdown ends, and the worship leader starts reading from Ephesians 2. "And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Jesus Christ. For by grace you have been saved through faith." And then the worship leader says, "Let's stand and sing with thankfulness as a response to the salvation we have in Jesus." And the band starts to play Glorious Day. In which of those two scenarios are you more likely to join in and sing? Obviously, it's the scenario where you've been reminded and encountered the transforming power and the hope of the gospel through God's word. Not because of any fancy worship leader language, not because of a personality or celebrity or because of technology, not because of how a song makes you feel. You sing because you've been reminded of the truth of God's grace and encouraged to respond to him by singing with other redeemed believers. As a follower of Christ and a part of the church, how could you not want to sing about that? That's obviously a longer example, but if time is a concern in your service, you don't even need an extended moment for this to be effective. You can say something quick. You can read a single verse. You can speak over the intro of the song you were already going to play anyway. You don't even have to explain the verse that you just read. Just be faithful in reading scripture and let God's word speak for itself. And this doesn't have to be difficult to prepare either. If the first song is great things, I'm going to go to Google and type in verses about the great things that God has done. And Psalm 126 pops up, and before we sing, I read verses 2 and 3. "Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad." And then I encourage people to sing with gladness and thankfulness for all we've seen God do in our lives. And you can lead at the start of your service in other ways too. Maybe you open by leading a time of corporate prayer or some kind of responsive reading. Switch it up. The idea is to lead them by giving them something biblical to respond to, not just expecting them to walk in and passionately sing. Help them sing by giving them something to sing about. Being intentional with those few seconds at the beginning of your service every week can radically change the participation of your congregation in singing, especially over the long term, because it's the word and the Spirit of God moving people to respond with worship, not us as worship leaders. So lead through the opening of your worship gathering. Then you can apply that same principle throughout the entirety of the worship set. As you play through your worship set, find opportunities to continually remind people verbally that we are gathered to worship and sing together. Lead throughout songs and during song transitions. Lead through open sections and longer instrumentals. Pray intentionally when you pray. Don't just pray as a transition to the next part of your service. Use all these spaces as opportunities to lead and shepherd and teach and encourage your church to sing by reminding them repeatedly that they're not consumers to be entertained by the music your team leads, but they're participants designed by God to sing to him in the fellowship of other believers. I use the example of Glorious Day. That song has several spots where you could lead like this. You could extend the acoustic intro and lead a call to worship there, like I mentioned before. You could lead by saying something in the long interludes between the choruses and the next verse. Or there's the instrumental and the long low vamp between the second chorus and the start of the bridge, where you could read scripture or encourage people in those lyrics you're about to sing, that we were people who needed rescue from the bondage of our sin and that we now have freedom because of the grace of Christ. And then every time you sing that song, you can emphasize a different biblical principle from a lyric that encourages your church to respond with singing. And you can do this with any song. If the idea of leading through songs is new for you or seems overwhelming, one easy way to start is by feeding lyrics. Just saying a few words of the next line in the song in the interlude or the turnaround before those lyrics are sung. So before the last verse of Living Hope, I might say, let's sing this together. Then came the morning, or sing with us, Be Thou My Vision, or let's sing, How Great Is Our God. Yes, they're probably already familiar with the song. Yes, the lyrics are already on the screen or in the hymnal, but more than me revealing the upcoming lyrics that are already obvious, this is repeated reinforcement that we are singing together, and you, the church, are expected and encouraged to sing with us, the worship team. And as you get used to speaking and leading through songs just a little bit this way, you'll get more comfortable in preparing more intentional, impactful moments throughout the entire set. Wherever you're at with leading through songs and worship sets, to be most effective, I recommend not just doing it on the fly, especially if the idea of leading this way is new for you. Prepare what you're going to say, prepare how you're going to say it, and how long it's going to take you to say it before that moment happens. As you're planning and rehearsing, find where these opportunities in the worship set are ahead of time and think through how you can lead through longer song interludes or extended instrumental sections or transitions between songs. Use these opportunities intentionally and plan what you'll say so you can communicate something biblical and meaningful that leads people to respond to God by singing to Him and to each other. Maybe you're watching this video and you're agreeing with me as I talk about leading your church verbally and being intentional about what you say and planning to shepherd through high impact moments in your worship set, but you're just not sure how to actually do it. You're wondering what to say and how to say it. I think it's one of the most common questions of worship leaders who do want to be great leaders and shepherds and not just singers. I know it was for me, and it's one of the things we're always trying to get better at because it does matter so much. It was way too much to cover in this video, but I will have some very practical resources dedicated to exactly how to do that well coming very soon. So if that's you, stay on the lookout for that. We know the things we say from the stage carry so much weight and can truly help change the way your church engages in corporate worship. But I also want to point out that you don't always have to do this verbally. Another easy and effective way to encourage singing as a response is to put relevant scripture verses on screen during the song rather than speak them, and those can keep people engaged in worship when words aren't being sung. A lot of songs have instrumental interludes or a long intro or outro or an open section before the bridge, and I've seen these empty spaces wasted time and time again. The reality is that a lot of people don't know what to do or how to worship if there aren't words on the screen. So they stand there and they check out for however long the instrumental is while they wait for the next lyric to pop up. So the question for us is, how do we keep them engaged? And if you aren't comfortable speaking, and honestly, sometimes even if you are, you can utilize those instrumental sections to put up a Bible verse or a passage that the song is based on to help people understand what they're singing, to keep them engaged with God's word in those instrumental moments, and to encourage their worshipful response from Scripture. Not every quick break needs to be filled with something, but the idea is to take advantage and be intentional with every opportunity that you have. And lastly, I think it's worth noting that you can also lead by what you don't sing. If you've ever experienced a moment where you brought the band down, you back away from the mic, and you just hear the church sing loudly together, you know how powerful those moments can be. So plan for those moments in your worship gatherings. As you're working through your set, find moments that you know your people are familiar enough to sing without you leading them. Maybe it's a familiar chorus or an old hymn refrain. And have your team drop back away from their mics and just allow everyone to sing and hear and be heard by each other. These can be really powerful moments of reminding us that we do sing to and for each other, and to be encouraged by our collective belief and unity in faith as we sing together. Just because we're leading worship doesn't mean we need to be heard all the time, and planning for moments like that or allowing them to happen spontaneously can really encourage your church to sing. The main goal in all of this is to be intentional about how you lead your people to respond through singing in worship. And you can do that starting this Sunday. Here are some suggestions for how. Number one, start your service this weekend with a call to worship, no matter how simple or brief. Use a Bible verse that relates to your opening song and encourage people to respond to the truth of that scripture with singing. Number two, plan to pray intentionally and specifically before or after one of your songs, rather than just praying what comes to mind in the moment. Pray along the lines of the theme of the song in order to reinforce the biblical truth that you just sang about. Three, plan one moment in your worship set this week where you and your team encourage congregational singing by backing off your mics during a familiar song chorus or the refrain of a hymn. An easy way to do this is to add an extra low chorus at the end of a song that you know your church knows well. So play the song through in full and then add one extra low chorus at the end where everyone can just sing together. And number four, work with your production or tech team and project one passage of relevant scripture on screen during a long song transition or a long instrumental to keep people engaged and lead people to respond to the truth of God's word with singing. Don't just be a singer, be a shepherd by intentionally leading your church through the songs you sing in your corporate worship gatherings. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in part 3.